No problem, it was worth it. I'm going to invite Chief Jim Burchett to come forward now.
Good evening. I'm Jim Burchett. I'm the interim Chief of Police for the Bremerton Police Department. And I've held that position since January of this year, so I'm kind of new at it. But I've been with the Bremerton Police Department 25 years. Who are all the students in the room? Could you raise your hand? If you're a Bremerton High School student or a Bremerton School District student. How about the parents? Could you raise your hand? Okay, and then staff, school staff? And I'm assuming anyone that didn't raise their hand is a community member. Well, when I prepared my statements for today, I thought what I wanted to talk about, I kind of envisioned a different audience. You know, I thought I'd be talking to a group, you know, high school students, and I wanted to leave them with one thing if we left here to remember in the case of if tragedy happened here. And we're going to get to that, but if any of you public speakers out there, you set your track on what you're going to say, and then you see your audience and you're like, oh, we're taking a 90-degree. I'm going to do that a little bit right now. You know, my job as the police chief in relation to mass shooting events is have multiple steps that I need to take. One of those, I need to make sure our officers are trained in how to handle those situations. We all know the story of Columbine in 1999. Littleton, Colorado, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, they sat outside because that's what they were trained to do back then. Contain, try to negotiate. Well, the problem was Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had no interest in negotiating anything. All they were cared about is inflicting as much casualties as they could. So law enforcement, over the years, began changing what they did. We developed new tactics, and basically, we're forfeiting our safety for your child's safety. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that with the SRO. But in very simple language, we're going to charge to the sound of the guns and take action. A second part of my duty as the chief is to make sure I have the proper policies in place so all our staff members know what to do in those situations. On top of that, I need to train them. And by training them, it means not only classwork, but active live fire exercises, which we have done in Bremerton High School and the Old East High School with multiple agencies with fire in the school. So it's a multi-agency approach. Fourth thing, I need to make sure I have people trained in the latest technology or latest systems of dealing with school shootings, and that we've chosen ALICE, the ALICE system, and Kenny Davis is one of our trainers. And then it's also to provide training to the community, both in ALICE, and then more specifically, I want you to leave here with, if you don't have any ALICE training, I want to leave you with 4 things you can do to survive one of these mass casualty events. So, I got the whole police thing out of the way, and as I was sitting writing my comments, I thought, what would I, as a parent, want to know if I was sitting in your seats? Well, in 2012, I was one of your parents. I had 3 awesome kids in a high school just to the north of us in another school district. My son, Adam, was a senior. My son, Brian, was a junior, and my beautiful daughter, Allison, was a sophomore at the time. In December of 2012, we had Sandy Hook, if you remember Sandy Hook. And excuse me, if you're like me, whenever I see a tragedy, I impose my child on that tragedy, and all I can think about is their safety. So the news started exploding about Sandy Hook, and then reports began coming out on how they handle it, and I thought to myself, this is 2012. Columbine was 1999. What has happened in the intervening 13 years that we're doing the same old thing that we always did? You know, why are we doing this? So I began asking the teachers. I was a coach at this particular school, and I said, you're a teacher here, what are you trained? And it was, lockdown, shelter in place. And I thought, well, that's great. What else? And that was it. And I was, as a dad, as a law enforcement officer, especially who had access to all the best, latest techniques, I thought, well, they're missing a couple steps there. So I'm going to take control of my child's safety. I sat Allison, Brian, and Adam down on the couch, and I gave them 4 things. I go, I know your school, we teach you to obey your teachers, you know, you're very respectful, but if a shooting comes to your school, you're going to do these 4 things. And I'll cover those in a little bit. You probably are interested in what I told my kids. You know, if you're here as a student, I'm going to create a little tension as you wait. Fast forward. The reason, I'm going to echo what Dr. Leavell said. This issue, the big idea I want you to take away, this is not a school issue. This is not what the school is going to do to keep you safe or law enforcement. It is all of us. And that kind of sounds trite and maybe not serious, but I'm going to tell you it's actually the truth. And citizens, school teachers, school children can have a significant impact on the outcome of a mass shooting. Okay, we have the data. We have databases that we've collected of all the mass shootings going back into the 80s. We know how shooters react. We know, for the most part, their motivations. And there's a common theme throughout all of these things. And where it comes into you for your safety is in 2 areas. Number 1 is prevention. And we'll talk about that in a second. And the second thing is, if the worst thing that happened and a shooting broke out right now, would you know what to do? Okay? So let me discuss real quick on prevention. We know that school shootings are not a spur-of-the-moment event. These are troubled youth, or adults for that matter, who've been struggling with life, unable to cope for many years. And they begin having these dangerous thoughts, and we know from the research and investigations we've done that a school shooting is usually 6 months to a year in planning beforehand. Well, along this year-long process, they're leaving a trail of warning signs that we miss, that we don't have to miss. They write disturbing things. They have an unusual obsession with guns. They like to harm small animals. They videotape themselves with guns. They take photographs of guns. They idolize other school shooters. Kip Krinkle, a mass shooter who later he idolized Eric Harris, the sociopath from Columbine. This is a common theme. They idolize Hitler. We know these things. You know, the problem is during this year-long workup to their shooting, they're also telling other students. Okay? 80% of school shootings, the investigation turns out that the shooter told 1 or more other students, and that student said nothing. Okay? And there's a reason for that, right? As students in my day and even in today, students have an amazing capacity to keep things to themselves. You know, there are things going on in your lives that your parents will never know. Okay? But here's the one area where you can save your life. You can save the life of your schoolmates, and you can save the life of teachers. This is not the time for secrecy. This is the time to say something. If you have a direct indication, I'm talking to the students, I can see the students here. If somebody tells you, I'm going to go shoot up the school, all friendships are off, any code that you might have had of not saying things to adults, that's all out the window, okay? The school safety relies on you telling somebody in authority. The second area of prevention I want to talk to is the parents, especially the parents that there's probably nobody in here, but over and over and over again in these case studies, the parents were deeply ashamed. They recognized their child had troubling behavior, and for whatever reason, they didn't say anything. They bought their kids guns to appease them. When the schools would come to them, they would dismiss it and saying, you know, if we do anything, it's going to be a black mark on my son's name. It's going to hinder his progress through life. And in the end, they ended up with a dead son and a bunch of dead classmates. This is a hard thing to say, but if you observe these traits in children, it's extremely rare, so I doubt there's anybody in here, but somebody needs to get some help. Second thing you can do in your home is eliminate easy access to guns. You know, this is not a debate about firearms today, but what I will say is our data shows that the majority of guns used in school shootings come from the home. Either that or they're a close relative. They're easy access, so if you got a gun safe, you better use it. Okay? If they know the combo to your gun safe, change the combo. There's no reason in today's day and age a high school student should have access to firearms. Last thing I'll say for parents in the prevention area is just monitor your children's behavior. You know, if you have a straight A student, you know, there's one level of monitoring, but if you have a child that you know is deeply troubled, this is not the time to ignore that behavior. And if the school comes to you and tells you they're concerned about his behavior, you better pay attention, because it's a warning sign that's missed time and time again in the United States. So those are the things you can do on the front end. If you do those simple things, say something when you hear something, eliminate access to guns, you're going to eliminate the majority of shootings, right? On the back end, if the worst thing happens, now I'm going to tell you what I told my kids, okay? And I will tell you, the SRO Kenny Davis, my school resource officer, he's awesome. He's going to come up and tell you what ALICE is. This is a rudimentary ALICE, what I told him. Number one, now remember this is 2012. We have refined things coming up. But this can be used in any situation, a church, a shooting, a mall, if you're at the library or in the park. Is if you hear things that sound like gunfire, don't assume it's firecrackers. Over and over and over again, we repeatedly interviewed people that were in the schools. They hesitated because they thought it was initially firecrackers until it was too late. If you hear those kind of noises, assume the worst and go to step two. Step two is what I told my kids, is get out of there. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. We'll worry about it later. Just get out of danger, one in the exact opposite direction of the gunfire. Step three, looking at each one of my kids. If you can't run, then we're going to do the shelter in place, barricade the door, turn out the lights, do your best to hide. Step four, worst case scenario. The intruder makes it into your area where you're hiding, then you're in a fight for your life. Okay? All bets are off. You know, it's very unusual to talk about this in a school district, right? I deal with violence every day. I've investigated countless homicides and shootings. I live that life, right? I've been in classes. It's an ugly thing, and kids are not used to it. But I want my kids to fight for their lives because they could save somebody else's life in the process. Now that's what I told my kids. 2018, that whole process is a more refined process. Now we have ALICE. Your kids will be, depending on their age group, receive a different variation of that. But that's going to come, I guess now's my segue to turn it over to SRO Davis. He's my ALICE trainer. He's the one that interacts with the students here at Bremerton High School or any other school. And he's a fantastic resource. I kind of rushed. There's a whole broad topic on school shootings, and I probably didn't answer or cover all the things that you wanted to know. But we do have a question and answer period at the end, and I'll be glad to stay here as long as you want. And so when you leave here, you're fully satisfied with everything I know. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Officer Kenny Davis, Bremerton Police Department. They say never follow a better act. That was pretty good, but I'll do what I can. Anyway, a little bit about me. I've been a police officer for 24 years now, 19 of them with the city of Bremerton. I served 10 years on the Kitsap County Regional SWAT Team. They sent me to Crisis Intervention Officer School, which I became last year. And I don't tell you all that to provide you with my fantastic resume. I tell you that because I would want to know who my SRO is and kind of what kind of guy he is, and if he knows what he's doing. And I kind of feel like I bring a little bit to the table as far as tactical knowledge and things like that. I became the SRO This year is my first year as the SRO, which is a very big learning experience. Never thought I'd be interested in the SRO position, but the former Chief Strand, before Chief Burchett, put out an email really encouraging people to apply for this position. Talked about the life-enriching qualities about this position, and he was absolutely right. I've got to say, in my 24 years of law enforcement experience, I've held quite a few different positions, from canine officer to detective, and this is probably my favorite gig so far. So what does SRO do? A lot of people don't really know what an SRO does. You know, I'm a police officer and I'm in the schools. The SRO serves as several, I would say, different disciplines. I'm a police officer, so I'm out there as a deterrent to crime. Spend a majority of my time at the high school and the middle school. My office is here at the high school. I have a very small closet-sized office at the middle school. And then I try to visit the elementary schools when I can. I kind of like to, I say it like this, when I first started this thing this year, you know, my first week I walked down the hallway at the high school. Hi there, I'm your SRO, hi. And high schoolers, like my own, you know, they're kind of in their phones, doing their thing, got their earphones on, and they just kind of go, what's up, how's it going? Yeah, who is this guy? So, then it goes down to the middle school, because after I go to the high school in the mornings, I like to go out to the middle school and meet the kids there. And they're a little more receptive, if you will, to me. They still think I'm pretty cool, because, you know, I wear a uniform and that kind of thing. But they're getting older. And then when I really want my ego stroked, I go to the elementary school. Because they really think I'm still pretty cool. So, when I can, I try to go out to the elementary schools and have lunch with the kids at one of the elementary schools. They really think it's a big deal to go out and play on the playground, and so do I. So, I serve in that respect as a deterrent to crime. Because crime does go on in school, I'm sure you're all aware of that. So I kind of hope that my presence as a uniformed police officer helps maybe to prevent some things from happening. I also serve as somewhat of a counselor, I found out. As I move through the day and sometimes deal with kids on different levels, once I've made that contact with that child, I tend to kind of form somewhat of a relationship with each child that I deal with. You know, I don't get to say hi to every one of them. I don't know all their names, but slowly but surely, certain ones that I see a lot, we develop a relationship. And then they go out, I hope, and talk about me to other kids, and talk about how nice Officer Davis is, and build my reputation up. So, I do some counseling with, you know, my door's always open in my office. Kids come and see me once in a while to talk about a problem at home or whatever their issue might be. I also work with the administration as a staff member, if you will. Sit in on meetings with the staff. Sometimes it's to the superintendent's office when we have something big that they need to bring me in on to talk about. So that's kind of what the role of an SRO is. They sent me to ALICE instructor school this past year because the district is going to the ALICE system. And like Chief Burchett said, I'll tell you a little bit about that. We've already touched on it, but you know, I'll go through the acronyms with you. ALERT, okay, and that's what that has to do with is obviously when any kind of threat, of course we're talking about the active shooter's threat. Alert is calling 911, loudspeaker, text, whatever people in the school can do to get the word out that there's this problem happening. Lockdown. That's kind of pretty self-explanatory. That's when teachers, staff will lock down in their rooms. Okay, but it's not quite the traditional lockdown that we know in the sense of Columbine and things like that. We're talking about locking down and barricading. Okay, there's a difference. Barricading, and there are some techniques that I learned at Alice Instructor School about how to barricade a room to better your chances of a bad guy getting into the room. Inform. Again, that's kind of a continuation of alert. What we're talking about there is any real-time intelligence that we can gather about where the suspect is in the school. At Bremerton, like Bremerton High School and the middle school, they have video cameras, they have security people. In that kind of event, if there's a security person who can get into the camera room, communicate with me, and I carry a school radio as well as my police radio so that I can talk to their security people, and I can relay that to the dispatch center to other officers. So that helps us find out very quickly where the threat is, which again minimizes casualties, which is what we're trying to do. Counter. Counter is, again, Chief Burchett touched on that. And this is a kind of age-appropriate training. We're not talking about countering for kindergartners, okay? We're not asking them to counter and fight an active shooter. That's not going to happen. We know that. But we are talking about, in the respect of older kids and teachers, if that suspect or that intruder makes it into the room, like Chief Burchett said, now you have to take some action against that person. Or obviously he's going to shoot people in that room. So you have to stop him. And there's techniques for that are taught in the ALICE system that's to counter that person. Okay. Evacuate. Again, that's the number one thing we want to do, if we can do it. And the ALICE system is not, like, those are not chronological order things to do. It's a very fluid concept. One may not be appropriate right now. If we can evacuate, we don't need to lock down, right? If we can get out now, we don't have to lock down. So it's kind of a fluid concept, and none of those are chronological. Whatever applies at that moment is what we're going to be training them to do. Our first training session will be coming up in April, where myself and one of the other ALICE instructors, one of the assistant principals at the high school, will be teaching staff and starting that process going. So, there's one more thing I'd really like to talk about tonight. Something kind of near and dear to my heart, especially assuming this new role as the school resource officer. As we talked about before, this kind of all has been kind of moved forward. Our catalyst was the Florida shooting, right? And I'm sure you all heard on the news, I don't know how you couldn't know it, but there was a breakdown in Parkland, Florida, with the school resource officer and the officers on scene, and I'm sure you've probably heard of that. And that's kind of near and dear to myself and Chief Burchett and all the police officers that do this for a living, because as he said, our job is to protect people. Okay, and when that happened, and what didn't happen, as a school resource officer, I can't wrap my brain around that. Our job is to act, and our job is to engage and stop whatever the bad thing is that's happening, whether that's in the schools or whether that's anywhere out in the rest of the world. That's our job. And not only is it our job, it's my privilege and my honor to be the school resource officer, and you know, your kids are my responsibility. So I guess I want to leave you on a note that you can rest assured that that won't happen here. Should an event like that occur, God forbid, if that should happen here, myself and the rest of the Bremerton Police Department, we're not trained that way, that whatever that way is in Florida. Our training is to engage. And my job and my honor is to defend your kid's life at the risk of my own. So I just want you all to know that should that fateful day come, what happened there will not happen here. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Our next speaker is Dana Rosenbach, the superintendent for the North Mason School District.
Hi, normally I would walk around too, but I think I've just got off my crutches, so I can always hold on to the podium here if I need help. First of all, I want to say how honored I am to be here tonight. As a former East High Knight of just a few years ago, it's pretty exciting to be back in Bremerton to speak with you. I also want to tell you when the idea of a mass casualty first became real to me as an educator. About in 1999, I was teaching at Cesar Chavez Elementary School in the Alisal district in Salinas, California. It was my first day. I was hired on October 27th. And I was outside with my fourth graders on the playground when there was a drive-by across the street. And we had to react in the moment to a very scary situation. And that's when the idea of something happening to my students, who I was responsible for as a teacher, became very real. And so that experience informed the rest of my career as an educator up to and including this moment, whether as a teacher or a principal or a central office administrator, or now as a superintendent, understanding the very real threats to safety and security, to just feeling comfortable at school that our students face every day, that I certainly didn't have to worry about as a freshman at East Bremerton High School. Has really informed and changed the way that we do things in schools. But what I was asked to talk about was our experience a year ago, and it was just about this time last year when the principal at the high school, right at the beginning of the day, called and said they had had a report. They were pulling a student into class, and deputies were on the way to meet them in the office to talk to the student about a potential threat. The next thing I knew, and I mean in a matter of less than a minute, I got a call directly into my office phone from NBC New York telling me that they heard there were casualties at our middle school and what were we doing about it. And while they were talking, I looked out the window and saw the deputies running across from the high school to the middle school with their great big guns out, and things got to a very serious turn very quickly. So we were very lucky that day in multiple ways. We were very lucky that what happened turned out to be a false alarm. And it was a false alarm that was exacerbated by social media. There was a report that students saw the student removed from the classroom at the high school and started putting things out on social media and telling what they thought might be happening. And that became a very elaborate modern version of the game we used to play in kindergarten called telephone, where you whisper something to someone and go around the circle and find out what the story changed from the beginning to the end. So it started out with the report going out to friends and family that a certain student was removed from class and that they took his backpack and they searched his backpack and that they were looking for a weapon, to a report in a matter of a minute that a student had come into the middle school next door across the campus and had shot several classmates. So, of course, we didn't know all of that at the time. And this is something that for us for every school is very, very scary, and something that we train and practice and implement all sorts of preventive measures for. One of the things that we faced is, as a rural district, we are very well aware that in most cases, if something happens, we're going to be lucky, with the exception of our school resource officer, if we get responders within 30 minutes. This particular day, that was not the case. We had the benefit of, there was a SWAT training somewhere nearby. We had SWAT officers at the building flying through Belfair, by the way, in just less than probably 15 minutes. We had over 115 responders from over a dozen state, federal, various counties, including Kitsap, Pierce, Jefferson, and Thurston, in addition to our own Mason County, tribal officers, Fish and Wildlife. So we had lots and lots of people there to help us and help with the kids. As we got into the almost an hour, maybe an hour and a half into the situation, we were starting to determine that we probably did have a false alarm, but we had to clear the building and clear every single student. At that point, we met with the first responders and determined that we were going to carry it all the way through as if it were a real event, even when it became clear that it wasn't, so that we could take advantage of that opportunity to train the first responders that were there, as well as our staff. For us, ALICE was something we started working on last year, so our staff at Hawkins Middle School had been through the training and were able to implement some of the strategies with their students. One of the things that we learned as we dealt with the situation and moved throughout the day was that it really didn't matter in the end for many of our families that this was a false alarm. For the families and for the students, it was very real, and the impacts to their social and emotional health, their mental health, were just as real and serious. So our parents, for a couple of hours, at least an hour and a half, experienced the idea that their child might not be coming home. Our students were in the building at the high school and the middle school, in secure locations, yes, but they weren't sure what was going to happen at the end of the day. So we learned a lot about what we needed to do in the aftermath to support our families and our community as well. And we learned a lot of other things too. One of the things we've been very fortunate has been to participate with the ESD and the other districts and first responders in the region on a cooperative to support school safety and security. And as part of that, we have developed really strong relationships with the first responders in our, very specific in our district, but with first responders throughout the region. So we have been working since I arrived in the district 4 years ago on safety and security, but this experience gave us the opportunity to evaluate in a real life situation if the plans that we've been working on and the training that we've been implementing would work. And we found places that we needed to improve, and in partnership with our first responders, we've made really strong strides in making sure that should something happen again, or should something happen even more seriously, that we will be prepared to respond as effectively as possible. And one of the things I know Aaron talked about, and the resource officer and chief, we have been also working through the ALICE training. And in fact, our middle schools are kind of leading the way in getting our students trained, excuse me. Last month, they did a tabletop training in each classroom for about an hour at the end of the day. The principal came on and said, okay, we're gonna do, this is what's happening. Somebody's come into the building. So the kids sat with their teacher and problem solved through the Alice materials, how they would respond to that piece of the scenario. And then the principal came on and gave them a next step. Okay, now this is what's happening. So the kids worked through that very effectively. This month, they are going to have a live drill of the Alice training and of an active shooter so that the kids can feel comfortable in their own efficacy and how they will respond in these kinds of situations. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. I'm thankful that we're all working together to make our kids safe. I'm sorry that we live in a world where that's a reality, but we have outstanding people in our first responders, in our school staff, and in our community to help us work together to make sure all of our kids are safe, and thank you.
And the last panelist we'll hear from is Dr. Niran Al-Agba.
So I'm going to cover a couple kind of quick things, but I'll tell you a story because as Dana was just talking about her first day at work, my last college final at Michigan State, it was at that time was the largest university in the country, was history of documentary and film. And I went in that day with, all full of facts, and we're all sitting in our seats, and I turned around to the guy behind me and I said, hey, what was that film by that guy, this or that? He's like, oh, I don't know. And I thought, boy, that guy's gonna fail the final. Good Lord, I'm gonna do great. And then in the middle of the final, they tackled a guy 3 rows or 4 rows behind us who'd made a threat at the university. And of course, these were FBI agents undercover, supposed to look like college students. And I think at that time, again, I was thinking, well, I guess at least that guy doesn't have to take the test, so that's a plus, because he didn't really know anything about that. But it was the first time I came face to face with sort of the reality of our world or where we were heading. That was many years ago, and it's kind of gone downhill from there. And I wasn't actually there the day of Columbine, so I did want to correct that a little bit. But what I did learn, I was there 2 months afterwards. That's when I started my residency. And what I think we forget is there's the day, and there's the losses, and then there's the lives that are affected forever. And so I knew a lot of the kids in the library that day that were with their friends, that watched their friends die, that carried wounds with them that they still carry today. And a lot of them still write about it. There's quite a few kids that are vocal about how they have tried to move past the experience, and it's been tremendously difficult. So this is such a large problem. I know these wonderful people have talked to you about what we can do in the middle of the situation or just before or just after, how to keep your kids physically safe in that moment. I'm a pediatrician, so obviously prevention is my business. And obviously preventing kids from getting injured, preventing them from getting sick, saving their lives, those sorts of things when they get infected. So what's been important to me is how do we prevent these events from happening, or how do we predict them? And so for me, after Parkland, I spent quite a bit of time, and I wrote about it in the newspaper, obviously, as well, dealing with Sandy Hook Promise. And Sandy Hook, those parents obviously dealt with tremendous tragedy. And it was a hard one for me, I think, because my kids are young. I have 4 kids, they're 10 and under, all still elementary age. And that really, my kids were about kindergarten age at the time, and it was tremendously hard. And so what they've put together is an amazing program, and I want to say I'm going to cover 4 of their programs that you could do today. So I know we talk about a variety of levels, from federal, state, local. What can we do as parents? What can we do as kids to make a difference? These are free programs. They will offset the cost. Sandy Hook Promise will offset the cost for interested communities or schools, and they're actually backed by science. So a lot of what I have to do is not really feel-good stuff, although it's fun to work with kids. It has to be based in science. So it makes no sense to give you information that is my opinion, in all honesty, although I do share my opinion quite a bit. But this kind of stuff, I think science is what's important. And so what we found is, first of all, I'm going to cover the 4 programs. The first is like Playful Playground that Dr. Leavell mentioned. It's called Start With Hello. I did write about that in the newspaper. It's elementary school kids, and there's a toolkit, an organized toolkit that parents can reach out and get, or community members, talking about how to help kids feel included in school. And I know these things sound a little pansy-ish, because I'm not tackling anybody or having weapons, but I do think if we can stop some of these before they start, we can make a big difference. So again, meeting with a friend at school, nobody eats alone, paying attention to what's going on around you. I'm constantly telling my kids, don't let kids be left alone. Don't make fun of one kid. If you're gonna make fun of kids, make fun of all the kids, and then make fun of yourself, spread it around. But it's really important not to single out kids for having differences, for having disabilities, for being of a different color. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think we need to be talking to our kids about this stuff in really concrete ways, because I think it makes a difference and they start to understand what's going on around them. And as these individuals mentioned, if kids can know what's going on around them, they can report when they see a problem. So that's one. Second is say something, which is also what Chief Burchett mentioned, although this is the specific Sandy Hook program. In 4 out of 5 school shootings, kids told someone ahead of time. So that means there was someone who knew and could do something. The question is, who do you talk to? So I get this question all the time. I'm worried about my son, I'm worried about my daughter, or this friend has a hit list they've made, or whatever it is. Do I call the police? Where do I go? What can the police do? So the question is, obviously, yes, let law enforcement know, but this talks about what do you do, who do you tell? And it concentrates on finding a safe adult. If you see something on social media, it specifically addresses programs like Instagram, which I don't understand, Twitter, Facebook, and whatever else is out there now. How to recognize warning signs that kids are in trouble, or they're engaging in at-risk behavior, or they're suicidal, or they're becoming violent. How to identify that behavior as a teenager, and then who to tell. And it's identifying specific adults that you can go to in the schools, or at home, or in your neighborhood, or at your church, that you can tell. So that's a huge part of identifying it. And then obviously suicide prevention is part of this whole process. I mean, isolated kids who are being bullied, who are miserable, who are depressed or anxious, they're more likely to commit suicide, to be honest with you, than they are to shoot up a school. But nevertheless, that means we're losing kids who could otherwise do great things in the world. And so that suicide program is about basically acknowledging you're seeing a problem, letting your friends or your children around you know you care, and telling a trusted adult. And believe it or not, so in science world, we love something called randomized controlled trials. That's sort of the gold standard for doing studies. And basically, people don't know who's the intervention group, who's getting the treatment, and who's not, and then you see what the outcome is. And it's been shown in those randomized controlled trials, this program, to reduce suicide attempts by 40 to 64%. I mean, that's amazing data. That's half. That's more than half reducing the numbers. And so, again, that's fantastic information. And you can do it today. That's what I'm a big action girl. So you can look at this stuff online at Sandy Hook Promise. It's available. It's free, and we need some motivated community members to want to get involved. And then finally, my favorite part of Sandy Hook, which is a little bit about what Dr. Leavell was talking about. It sounds like Bremerton is going to implement some of these threat assessment teams. But what's interesting is they also have a safety assessment and intervention program. Again, free. Did I mention that? And you can basically put together a team of 6 to 8 individuals. It can be school members, it can be school resource officers, counselors, psychologists in the area, educators, doctors, parents, community members. And you go to trainings, you learn how to do threat assessment. Again, this is scientifically based evaluations. There's a Virginia threat assessment. It's actually been validated in multiple studies, and you can go down the line, answer the questions, and figure out if, statistically speaking, this kid's going to be at risk to cause violence in the schools. To me, that's amazing. We constantly say we can't predict this, and we can make an educated guess. We're not going to get 100%, but gosh, if we could get half, imagine how many lives are going to be saved. So that's another part of it. And the research, they've evaluated that particular program, the threat assessment program, in reality in the schools that it's been implemented in. And here's what it's been shown to do: reduce violence, decrease bullying and aggression. That's not a bad thing. Reduced racial disparity in school suspensions and fewer suspensions overall. Increased participation from students to report threats, because it's becoming a more acceptable thing to do and people are more vocal about it. And then increased use of school counseling when it's needed, and increased parental involvement. So for me, those are really tangible things. And again, that's sandyhookpromise.org. The son has my email address too, so if there's questions or you hit a roadblock or you're not sure how to do this in the community, I'm happy to give advice or help, at least get you guys started. But I think it's a really important thing that you could do today that doesn't really depend on anybody else but parents and educators and children. And then the last thing I wanted to cover before I guess we open it up is anxiety. So anxiety is obviously a huge problem. 1 in 5 children experiences significant anxiety in their lifetime, and it often starts under the age of 18. A lot of it is involving experience with adverse childhood experiences, death of family, all sorts of addiction, mental illness, things along those lines in their parents. And it really sets kids back quite a bit. So I guess what I would say about anxiety, since I was asked to talk about how do you handle that, number one, anxiety is part of life. That's built into us. There are going to be times we're scared, we're worried. We need to acknowledge it. And I think parents, instead of making it go away and saying, oh no, that shot's not going to hurt, don't lie to kids. Just tell them the truth and help support them through it. So the most important thing is we've got to teach kids how to deal with anxiety, how to face it, and then how to deal with it and how to tolerate it, and then steps that they can do to make it better for them and how to handle it, how to handle life. And so that's a huge part of handling anxiety. And then never make promises you can't keep. So don't tell your kids there will never be a school shooting ever, ever, ever. It's highly probable there won't be for them. Schools tend to be safe places in general. But again, like Chief Burchett did, there's nothing wrong with sitting down and talking to your kids in real terms about what you would like them to do or what you think is the best thing for them to do. And so I think walking kids through reality is a really important thing. And finally, then, the other way to handle anxiety. So I wanted to leave you with a couple of tips tonight that, were memorable. And it's modeling behavior for your kids. So again, if the parent, I see this all the time, obviously giving shots to children, parent is completely losing it and freaking out, the kid starts to lose it. There's nothing that's more scary than watching your parent, the person who's in charge of your health and your happiness, completely fall apart, because that's super scary. So really checking yourself, and it's fine to share with your kids you're scared or you're worried, or it's even fine to cry in front of your kids or be upset. And I do that all the time, so I really hope it's good for them. I really think being honest with them and sharing who you are is very valuable, and it also teaches them how to handle tragedy, how to handle stress, how to handle anxiety, and in addition, I always think about the fact that we don't handle things great. We make mistakes. We scream and yell, we swear, we do all sorts of things we wish they didn't know about, and it's okay to let them know that we can do better too. So anytime those sorts of things happen and you lose it, once you calm down, go back and talk to your kids and let them know, look, mommy learned something. I'm going to do X, Y, Z in the future. Because I think they watch us make mistakes. Number one, they're going to learn from them. And number two, they're going to learn how to deal with that. And that's a huge part of this. So I hope that was helpful. I tried to be quick. I know you guys have been sitting for a while. Again, they know how to get a hold of me, so anytime I'm happy to answer questions. And I was born and raised here, so I know a lot of the schools. I went to Armitage and View Ridge and Olympic and all over the place. Thanks.
That was excellent. Let's, one more time. Thank you each. Thanks. It was very good. It was really good to hear different perspectives. Would the three of you come join us right now? The woman over here standing in the aisle is Chris Henry. Chris is the education reporter for the Kitsap Sun. She's the one who's been writing about Alice and explaining some of that to our readers. So I hope you've seen her work, and she'll probably continue to write about this as more things happen in the schools. What Chris's job is right now is to bring a microphone around. And so if you have questions that you'd like someone up here to answer, we'd love to hear them. There's already one, and I'm going to kick things off. This is what someone had written down and gave to Chris earlier. Dan Griffey, you're right here, so you may be a good person to start with on this one. The question is, why is there not a state standard plan for security and emergency? Dan is a legislator, and so he can maybe talk about what's being talked about in Olympia on that issue about security and emergency.
So I don't have a great answer for you. It hasn't been completed yet, but what I will tell you is that my efforts at Olympia are evaluate the facts of every mass shooting that's happened in every school, come up with the commonalities, and come up with a strategy that will fix what those commonalities are. And what we're working on in Olympia is best practice design of new schools and how can we retrofit the old schools. Some of the things that we're talking about are closed-circuit televisions where the video can be broadcast to local fire service and local law enforcement, so situational awareness is can be attained very early, so the law officer or the school resource officer can go right to where the issue is. The other issue that we're working on is school design. If you look at the new schools we're building, the new schools have vestibule-style entryways where one door opens but the next door doesn't, and it's hardened and secured, and you have to be buzzed in and you have to do a check-in. So that's another issue that we have. I expect, I'm actually demanding that the legislature fund about $100 million to put a school resource officer at least in every school, and that money would also allow for the bigger schools to have more than one school resource officer. Also to fund an independent, thank you, yes, it's time, and I urge all of you to call your legislator, whoever they may be. If you're in the 35th district, I already got it, I'm sponsoring the bill. We also beta tested a independent app. One of the things that we know, the good doctor just mentioned, was that somebody knew something and didn't say something, and quite frankly, we know that the kids say that they could be, and we can see maybe feared for their lives if they said something. So if we did the independent apps that were school-wide, we had the school resource officers in the schools that were trained investigators, they could follow up on that. And for the good doctor, to follow on what the good doctor was saying, it also talks about those people that you can report those people that you suspect that are having some mental health struggles. So the schools can immediately get resources to the school officers. The other issue is interoperability communications. I'm talking about a global plan. We don't have one, but this is my global plan, if I can get it done, is the President Clinton, I can't believe I've been a firefighter this long, but President Clinton ordered that we would establish interoperable communications, and I can talk to the police chief and my brothers and sisters. I'm a professional firefighter by trade, and I have been for almost 28 years, 32 years total experience. We're not as good at the interoperable communications where we can actually talk to each other as well as robustly as we'd like to. So instead of waiting for the feds to finish the project, I'd say Washington State can get that interoperable communications done now. I think if we did this multi-pronged approach, we're going to, Washington State will be an outlier, and we will be one of the first in the nations to put our kids totally first in this, and say that we know that we cannot stop all bad things from happening to our kids, but we certainly can be the first in the nation to do as active and robust planning and training as we're talking about here. And with that, I will stick around and answer any further questions you might have. Thank you.
I have one more here, but please raise your hands. Chris will come find you if you have something. I see one right here. We can see. Before you get right there, someone has asked, and maybe one of the superintendents can talk about this, what are the chances of instituting weapons safety curriculum in schools?
Really, honestly, that is not something at this time that we have considered. There are a lot of other pieces that we think we do a better job and can do a better job, both preventatively during the action and after action. And those include addressing the social emotional learning of the students, addressing safety, implementing effective threat assessments, responding appropriately during a threat, and responding appropriately after potential or real threats with the right kinds of support for mental and emotional health of our staff. Weapons safety is not a current part of the school curriculum in our state or any other, and I think there are other things that would help us better help keep kids safe for right now.
Okay. Chris is right here.
Hi, I have two children in the Bremerton School District. One is a kindergartner and one is currently a second grader. And I have been really concerned about this issue for the past 3 years, since my first went into elementary school. And I've had approximately 4 conversations with the principal of my school about what I see are overwhelming behavior issues at the elementary school that they both now attend. I've actually recently, as of this week, transferred my child to a different school because I've been honestly petrified by some of the behavior I've seen in the classroom. And I'm a former high school teacher at one of the largest high schools in the nation. I taught at Berkeley High School, so I'm no stranger to chaos in the learning environment. And today, unfortunately, my youngest child, who's 5 years old, school was not a safe place for her today. She was hit in the head with a cell phone that a student got away from his paraeducator. And she has a large bump on her head and had to go home early. So now I'm considering transferring her to a different school. Anyway, this is a very long-winded way of asking two really important questions that I have coming out of this. One is that in my conversations with the principal and other administrative staff, I've repeatedly been told, and this is, I guess, a question for the representatives, that they feel that their hands are tied in a lot of ways in dealing with students in that they can only be suspended for 10 total days per school year. And I've also heard that it is nearly impossible to expel a student. And I'm wondering, when we have students that do pose danger in the classroom, I've heard of, in my students' classrooms, students upending tables, throwing pencils at other students like darts. My child has had to hide behind chairs to avoid danger. Why are our hands tied in keeping students who are not appropriate for the group learning environment out of the classroom? Maybe when their parents don't agree to it. Maybe the parents aren't on board with removing the student. What is keeping my students safe in the classroom? So that's my question for the representatives. And my question for the superintendent is, what are the measures? I hear a lot of long-term solutions that you're currently proposing, and a lot of the programs that you talked about, I've already heard about from my school principal, and I'm really encouraged by that. But what are the immediate solutions that you have, short of lockdown and an emergency situation, for quickly and safely removing a child from a classroom who is posing a physical threat to my child?
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. I have equal concerns. I've only been in the legislature, just completed my 4th year. I am very concerned about the fact that I had strong disciplinarians when I went to school. I believe kids need to have strong role models. If there is any barrier the legislature has put on the schools about expulsion, because I believe expulsion is a tool. I believe alternative learning experiences are a tool. I also believe that mental health counseling and all the rest of it are tools. But the biggest thing that we have to do is make sure that the kids that are there at school and ready to learn have that ability. And all too often, we find that our school teachers and principals are societally challenged right now in just trying to make sure that they're doing the best thing that they can for the most. If there are barriers, I will actively help knock those barriers down for them. But I work very closely with these two superintendents here. I just talked to Aaron this afternoon on the phone, and I talk to Deanna maybe 2 or 3 times a month. So that when they answer the question, I will certainly listen. And if there is a state-imposed barrier, I have no problem tackling it, and they know that.
Well, thank you for your question, and I'm sorry that you transferred your students, that you feel that you needed to do that, and certainly respect that decision. To answer your question, it depends. I don't know the student or the classroom or the situation, but if it's a student that has particular special needs that's in this class and they have a paraeducator, there are different strategies that can be used with a student. We try not to restrain students unless that's our last resort for keeping the student safe, a staff member safe, or other students. Another strategy that is also used at the elementary level is if a student is out of